Okay, here we are in the Dunkin' Donuts.
Dunkin' Donuts, Westerly, Rhode Island.
Westerly, Rhode Island.
2005.
With the legendary Mike Silva.
And Steve Prell.
Steve Prowitz and Mike Silva in the Old Cosmic Testament. So now, Mike, what did you just said there about the thing you wanted to make clear about the point of view, and it's not about this, about that.
Yes.
It was your comment was about the saving of the world.
Yes, my comment was that all in all, from its initial incept, going circa 1988 at the very earliest. Although Steve, in his personal involvement, I believe would be to 85, 84.
Right.
But to me, it was always about a assemblage of embodiments of persona that once generated together would exponentially cause a tidal effect, shall we say.
Yes.
Which was about the enlightenment of all for the betterment of the world. It was never about the prediction of the destruction of the earth or the factors that would come together to caustically cause a deceleration or degeneration of civilization, but the ability to actually repair it and walk every last soul and being into the positiveness of what was always to be.
So it was never about personal power per se. It was about using whatever power we had personally.
It was about, for my personal involvement and my role in the actual acceleration of the process was to make sure that we never manipulated nor abused the energy available to us for the betterment of our own personal selves.
Yes.
Now, the babysitting factor in trying to make all that happen was an uphill battle, but it's nice to see that 20 years later or so, that at least the major players involved have understood that the apocalypse is a change for the better, not necessarily a destruction of the all.
And it's a kind of the idea of responsibility to me is what it implies. Our responsibility, the fact that we know, means we have to act. Otherwise,
my problem with mainstream society and individuals in general is once you know, you have to do something about it.
Indeed.
And that's what used to bother me the most, is that because we knew better, being idle was not
an option for us.
And then the abuse of the knowledge for our own personal gain was definitely cause for personal demise, in my opinion.
Yes. So. Indeed. So this is the Old Cosmic Testament, which has many, many things, of course. There's a couple of things. Actually, we can film it like this.
Very good.
Just a couple of things I want to cut to. Like this, I've used this as a method of synthesizing many things. So a lot of my personal artwork is in here. Abraxas, of course, is my own main cosmic goal, etc. These contents take me. All right, Mike. We're definitely getting together Sunday night, so we can go through these things in depth, if at all possible. Because I'll sacrifice sleep to carve out a nice chunk of time here. But of course, for me, it starts off with the Ross factor on the bench, right? And these are early tales about Ross, etc.
Of course.
And then it segues into the Nuahj era, and it's basically two phases here. On one side, I have a lot of printout recalling Nuahj tales and stuff. Here we have a lot of actual Nuahj artifacts, scribblings by myself and/or Greg and/or Jeff, whoever. Picture of Zarathos, perhaps.
I actually remember that picture, to tell you the truth.
And a lot of stuff going on here. But we'll cut to. Let's see. I mean, literally, we could be here forever.
Of course.
And this is actually Siocule stuff. This is when the chart had come into being. This is actually the paperwork Greg and I had been doodling in the International House of Pancakes. We first had come up with the idea of the chart in form of putting together the pieces. We started off with the Siocule for the energy molecule of the cosmic. I love that smile. Look at that smile. And the Tolkien Tengwar letters, etc., etc. But what I want to cut to here, just because time is an issue and we have about an hour, I want to make sure we maximize it. A lot of this stuff here is letters to Greg, letters to and from various characters. This stuff's early chart stuff. It's all in here. Have a fantastic day. Look at that. Jimmy Silva lives on. Have a fantastic day. And here's a scrawling by Mike Silva. This is when you and I were together in California in 1991.
Wow.
Right, and this is you. This is a letter I had written to Greg. Here's a copy of the document. Right now, let's just pause for a moment here, and now give me your reflection on what was going on in your mind, first at Nuahj, and then how that would play into me coming to California. Because for Nuahj, your role was as the out-of-the-box counselor, called you in a few times to when Matthew's getting out of control.
Yes, to settle some situations. Got to pull in some of my gunslinger attributes during those particular times.
Indeed, indeed. One tale that I often like to retell is about the we had Matthew. I was channeling Matthew.
Yes.
He had taken over. It was out of control. So John Patsfield calls up Mike Silva. Mike, this is John. Steve's been taken over by Matthew. Can you come help us out? Mike, hello. But Mike Silva was already in his car halfway to Nuahj by the time that sentence was finished. And he knocks on the door. John answers the door, and Mike utters the immortal line, "If you're fucking with me, you just signed your death warrant. What's happening? Take me to the action." So upstairs he goes, subdues Matthew. Now, like, at that level, what was your view looking at us and what the madness was going on?
Regardless, belief is belief. So, regardless of the actual situation, whether it had been Matthew overcoming your body or Steve Prelwitz putting on a show, was not a concern of mine. The concern of mine was that I had to take. I basically factored in the situation, which was there was definitely a symbiotic effect going on with Steve and another entity, whether of his own volition or not. And
at plot level, you could never tell.
Yes. But conclusively, what could be derived from the entire situation was that an entity within Steve would not be able to exist if Steve was no longer there. So the solution for the situation, regardless of the depth of its actualization, was that put Steve on the brink of life or death, and allow the entity to decide for itself whether it was there or not, or just a part of Steve's psychology, that if Steve dies, it would have to die with him or leave him. So I was prepared to kill Steve.
But you had to be right. Yes, right.
And take the full responsibility of my actions in doing so, but that's what I was there for more than anything else. Because Steve's well-being was my main concern, and to thwart, regardless of if it was a psychosis or a manifestation of spirituality, to give this particular situation, or Matthew, will go straight up, to let Matthew know that we were not people to be trifled with, that he was not welcomed at the time, and that to remove him from the picture, I was willing to remove Steve from the picture also.
Right, and that's something obviously he wasn't going to allow, no matter what. If it was me insane, if it was him genuinely, he's not going to be trapped into that situation, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we saw, like, my point of view on that, you were the ace in the hole, cosmically speaking. In other words, your appearance calling you in would trump whatever was happening on a channeling level.
Absolutely, because I am the person who believes anything and everything and always will. Every story, every fairy tale, every mythology is true. And the more energy that's given to that particular story, the more life it really has.
Indeed.
And the truer the existence of it. But Steve's welfare was my main concern more than anything else, to be point blank. And the situations that occurred prior to my arrival were such that nobody else would have been able to be in control of the situation, and Steve was physically and mentally overpowering every other person
that happened
to be on site.
Right.
So I don't want you, and since we are going on video, this can't be just a manifestation of speaking in tongues or anything like that. There were physical manifestations that took all the other players not only by surprise, but out of character. They were unable to, in all of their abilities, to settle the situation, both physically and mentally.
Right.
Albeit 4 guys being thrown all over the room when they were trying to subdue you, to the fact that any incantation and or holding pattern they could have verbally or spiritually or energetically put you in, you were able to break out of.
Right.
So the manifestation within you was definitely stronger than the parts that were already assembled.
Indeed, and that's the key. And so again, you were able to bring a level of power to the situation that could wrangle in whatever madness was emanating.
Steve Prelwitz for, because I've always personally believed that any degree of extrasensory or extra this extra dimensional energy form that would ever show itself would allow me to come into my true being, which I refuse to show, unless I am confronted with something that is trying to show that they are stronger and more powerful than I.
Right.
But when we function within this particular domain and universal parameters that are set forth by contemporary sciences and for what society is able to accept, we were just humble, lowly beings of at that time in our late teens for y'all, early 20s for me, although I don't think even at that time I was in my 20s yet. But point in being, spiritually, the strength and energy that is possessed by us, I just manifested myself as an equal of that which was within Steve, which all of us present had, but I still don't fully believe that the other players were willing to allow themselves that type of energy divergence because they still didn't fully believe in everything enough for them to believe in themselves.
Well, that's a good point. That's a real good point. So now, at the time, at the Nuahj level, we were still totally, like back at this level, insert any tales of the old cosmic that might be recorded at this point, for example.
Right.
Or, looking at even into the back of the book here, we have the genealogy of Nuahj, right? Just as an example, okay? Here's all the cosmic figures, right? And just at this level of madness here, what was going on? Obviously, we didn't have an understanding of plot level. I mean, you were the one that invented that term, plot level, but it was in the California perspective, looking back on all this insanity.
Exactly.
Right. Because at the height of Nuahj, that's when you first went off to California, and then that set us up for the next phase. Once we had turned that madness into something abstract, the chart, that's when we were able to bring it to you and say, Mike, okay, what would be the next phase of this? And the whole California thing became the next phase.
Correct.
So can you give some commentary on that, the 1991 period?
Okay.
When I first came out, and then later Greg and Jeff, etc.
As far, the only tale that I can really tell that would sum that all up was when you had come up with the dissertation, the paper.
The document, which is in here. Yes. It's in here. Okay.
And my best story along with that, other than trying to get those that would have no comprehension of what we were talking about, even though it was spelled out plain as day, in my opinion, would be calling the Dolce residence in Westerly, Rhode Island, and trying to get Greg on the phone and having his mother run interference. And basically having to let her know, no, Greg is an adult. He's over 18 years old. You must give him the phone now, says me. And from that day forward, it took over 20 years to get her to understand that I really am a genuinely nice guy. But I definitely put her under her stresses.
Indeed. See, this is look at this, individuals to whom the document is being sent, right? All these characters. And now, here's an early form of the chart. In this sense, again, still only 26 boxes. So this is a real early 1991 era chart.
Yes, before the full understanding of the 28. This
is when, because that didn't come about until Irvine, we'll get to that in a minute, but this was the first attempt at what was being loosely referred to as the Gathering. Right, where we had different
kinds of better terms.
And here it is. There's the immortal line. This is how we save the world.
Yes. Save.
How we can save the world. All right. So here's the document and everything. Now that era, there was a unique moment for you and I in that era. This is before Greg returned to California, etc. This was when Nuahj had crashed and burned. A lot of it I was driven mad by my pressures of the cult scenario. And my escape, essentially, from Greg and Jeff in San Francisco, because originally the three of us had gone west.
Right.
And the cosmic figures were kind of saying that, that the dynamic of the trio of us was not going to serve any greater purpose at all. It was just going to suck us backwards. Particularly Greg and I at that time were pretty fed up with each other, just from having been together constantly for 3 years, every day.
I think a lot of that was the manifestation that how come everything gets to happen to Steve? And I must make that a side commentary because that's my honest opinion. And being of the representation that Greg was, the clean slate, as I like to call him. It's all of inaction.
Yeah.
So the only action that would ever happen would be of his own volition, and he was a very stagnant figure in the entire trilogy that this has become.
Yes.
More than anything else. Although now it's becoming a septology.
Yes.
I believe
Well, that would be
explain it.
that would be inevitable, the sevenfold. But so at this point, then I really had escaped anyway all of my past, and I was basically coming to you with the chart in hand, the plates,
Right.
and essentially whatever we had managed to salvage
Out of
from
Nuahj.
out of Nuahj and out of that whole experimental consciousness circus. And that led us into the chart, and what the idea, as far as I was looking at it, was that, well, you know, saving the world, etc., by, in other words, the value of the chart is meta perception above the box perception, which then, through the conversations that you and I were having, that's when you came up with the plot level concept.
Right.
And for me at that time, early 91, the whole idea of plot level, it was the first time I was capable of seeing it, because it's the first time I was separated from any ongoing plot level.
Right.
For years, I had been in the game,
Yes.
and now we were above the game. So now what?
See, that was. I'm glad you bring that up, because for me to take a step back was always where I would drag my feet, because I firmly believed that to interact on this level, the plot level, say, as the manifestation of the whatever representation we were to fulfill in a fourth dimensional avenue is it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just you lessen yourself. You become more petty, because we are to be ourselves there, not here. Unless everything becomes one, a unidimension.
Interesting.
Then to channel that energy from there and manifest it here is to me was always an abuse. Like I would term the manipulation of knowing how things really were and are and will be. To bring that here for personal gain is a misuse of it, and to even manifest it here, what you had liked to bring out prior to our earlier conversation, you would have to form some sort of negative effect to prove yourself right, i.e. the apocalypse. If the apocalypse were to happen, we'd be able to prove all ourselves right. But what is the benefit of that other than to see, I told you so?
Right,
and that's
exactly.
not what it's all about. So that was always my biggest confrontation with the players that be, was that the assemblage of the energy was for the enlightenment and or to coax it in the proper directions as we saw fit, as guided by the Gaia presence that you have now come to terms with.
Yes.
And for us back then, it was the friend or the black and white or brown, however you'd like to explain it.
And it's interesting. It's interesting too, the way that in the old cosmic, the spirit of the earth, the Gaia presence, had manifested as the friend character, which was essentially the lost little girl.
Right.
And so, to me, that means that our collective perception of the Gaia presence was on one level immature, because we are immature, but also pure in the way that a child's view is pure.
Exactly. To me, to pre-7 years old, as we know, is the most influential and powerful point of an individual's capabilities in life, because most of the societal effects and is it nurture or nature, none of those things come into being before then, and a child will believe anything he or she is told up to that point before they start questioning the authority.
Yes.
In fact, as a segue, I hope where I have a problem with adults in their relationships with children is that we expect children to listen to what we say, and we're asking them to give up their own power to an adult figure, an adult in authority. So there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. So if you tell a child you're going to do something for them,
you better do
it, because part and parcel as they're giving up their own personal responsibility and authority over themselves.
Right.
And that's where we were in a cosmic light. We were the children, and we were willing to give up our own personal authority. But in that sense, if we were going to do that, then where we attached ourselves into the adults of authority of the cosmic, they had better have followed through on their personal agreement.
Yes.
And us trying to play both roles, to me, was never an option, because we would become corrupt in our own systematic workings of trying to bring the vision to fruition, because you can't be the child and the adult at the same time.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
And that's always been my own personal belief. And a lot of what you're saying, like you said, when I came up with plot level, most of what I did was allow Steve to run the scenario of understandings by me, and I would try to find the thread through which the truth could be non-contradictory for where society was at that point in my view. And that would be my own personal view, and hence it could be tainted by a myriad of things, my own upbringing, my personal biases, but in essence, because of the spirituality within me that I believed in as an integral part of the manifestation of the whole, it was a universal truth.
Indeed, and also that dynamic between the two of us. In other words, the theory was, in between the spectrum of Mike and Steve, sooner or later everybody else could be categorized.
Absolutely.
Particularly with the devil's advocate attitude that you would be adopting in those scenarios.
Because regardless of anything, even if I agreed with the route which you were running at the time, I would come up with the most contrary points as possible, whether I agreed and or believed in them or not. Because
that's what I needed to hear.
Well, and plus there would always be somebody out there that would be able to come up with those points.
Yes.
And for you to be the man with the answers, you would have to have been hit from every point of view, contrary and similar to the line we were running at the time, to be able to have the answers for all of those things.
Indeed.
So most of what I would give you back as feedback was everything you were already saying anyway, just in terminology that you might not have used on your own.
Right.
So I never came up with anything on my own other than the fact that anything that we decide to do must be acceptable to the last person who would believe it, as well as non-contrary or self-actualization for us individually.
Indeed.
And that's where the thing that slowed us down the most was the expectation of elevation to a level of power. And
that's the key, boy.
So,
that is the key. All right.
So
here,
to move on.
Here, I'll give you a breath here. You can take a sip of coffee. But so then, given all that you just said there, something like the document, which is obviously, very, on one level, very childish and immature in its hope and idealism. We'll just get these people together in a room, right? Here's a list of the 28 people, 26 people, and it's something magic, something wonderful will happen, right? But I think also here now, this is an example. Notice we have Greg critiquing me after the fact here, because he never wrote anything himself. He could just critique what I wrote. But the point though is with the document era especially, what we're seeing, in my view, is a stage constructed, an intermediate stage between the Nuahj level, which was me essentially in the center of the storm, and everybody, Greg being the first planet orbiting my nucleus, let's say, right? And then you had the opposite nucleus, that dynamic between the two of us. So when needed at Nuahj, your power could or level could be injected to balance off whatever madness was going on with me.
Agreed.
But at that time, at Nuahj, really, it was all about unfolding the content of the cosmic through me as the nucleus and all the figures in Nuahj as the periphery, Greg just the primary one.
Well, I think in retrospect, that's how it could be looked at. In the actualization of the time period, you were definitely self-absorbed in you were physically in the realms while trying to understand. You weren't an objectionable observer. You were an active participant.
Right. It was.
And that was that in and of itself was not unnerving in any way, shape, or form, but forms of splinter jealousies that were to develop that probably removed other people that could have been integral parts and sped the process along much more rapidly.
Right.
To put it on a mundane level, there are people who have been able to be successes between 18 and 22 years old. We could have possibly been that successful with this instead of making it an endeavor now that will take us through the next 7 years before
see.
it could come to its fruition.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, because a maturation level that comes with it, like I said, on a mundane level, you might have an entrepreneur who makes millions of dollars overnight,
Yeah,
but he'll
right.
tell you straight up, it took me 13 years to be
Right,
an overnight
right.
sensation.
And see, that also is key in terms of like when we get to like the world realities concepts, is that a lot of what we were doing in the 90s, so Nuahj was 1990, this was 1991 and on, is preparing ourselves, essentially scouting out territory, which now collectively
Yes.
is the hot zone. But we've already been there and back
I'll
again.
I'll also take it to a level of extreme more, being that we have corrupted the self of individuality of our own. We face, I look at it this way, using a mundane example again. If you have somebody who was always a choir boy, for lack of better terminology, and has a good life, then that is to be accepted. But if you have somebody who has stumbled along the way and then in the future becomes in the public eye, as I discussed with you the other night,
Yeah.
people could raise their hand and say, well, I knew you when you were an SOB and you were this and that
Right.
and that. And you can say, yes, but now look at where I am.
And the evidence
not-
is in the action.
And
yeah.
it's not in a I'm showing off phase. It's in a I have learned from those experiences.
Right.
And in other words, nobody has excuses. I have been one of the worst,
Right.
and I have also been able to see the light.
Right.
So I don't want to hear your petty excuses as to why you can't advance in your own mundane reality and become a success for yourself.
Right.
So I feel that by us almost taking ourselves out of the game at a very young phase, that although we put ourselves behind the 8 ball or other, whatever they're called, euphemisms and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
The point is that being a success, any of the other energy forms out there that would choose to say, well, we've been waiting for you for blah, 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 and blah,
Right,
blah, well,
right.
you know what? They can't be so self-satisfying because we've had to stumble these blocks and yet we still attained that role of equality on the same plane.
Yes.
So
And
to me, it's a very important fact to put in there that we took ourselves out, but now it looks like it might have been intentional the whole time.
Well, that's it. The retrospective view
Right.
always has to look that way. But that, with your point there, I'll just segue on that, is that in the Catholic Church, Augustine is revered as the greatest authority on sainthood because in his early life he was a drug addict, sex fiend.
Exactly. Now, getting back to the original chart and the players, I also feel, as you had said though, and maybe childishly, we thought we could just gather all of these people together in a room,
Right.
and wonderful things would happen.
Right
I
here,
take
for
it-
example.
I take it a step back from that. If anything, what it allowed us to do is to take the energy in the belief system and apply it through physical use. In other words, we might not have gotten these people together in a room, but we were able to use the force, for lack of a better word, to get to some of these people, like where to use the Weird Al Yankovic.
Right, showing up on Weird Al
Showing up
Yankovic's
his-
doorstep.
Yes, and speaking to his manager, and
Right.
allowing to get him a copy, and having
Right.
the door slammed in our face, but knocking again, and through conversation, through our verbal acid, based on the chart and
Right.
the arrangement of the way to get through to anybody,
Yes.
we proved its ability to work by using it
Yes.
to get. We might not have put the players together to save the world at that moment, but we used the concept to get to the players.
Yes.
So in and of itself, we proved that it would work.
Yes,
And
it
that's
would.
what
That's
we need
exactly
to take
it.
from that.
Indeed. So now segueing away here
Yes.
to
Now
the
we can move on.
the moving at the area of the document. Then it was basically you and I think at that point it was necessary for a purification for me and a lot of my growing up that I had to do. And, I didn't grow up much, but certain
Well,
parts
no,
of me
right.
did grow up.
Don't be so hard on yourself.
And then, I basically, let's see here, we have a lot early concepts here with the Stooges, and you just basically using the quaternity formula in any form just to understand what I would later come to understand fully through the alchemy of like the 4 elements, no matter what labels you're going to stick in there.
Right.
It's the dynamic of the relationship that we had to develop up until leading to the point in '93 with when we became the 4 elements fully with Mike Warren, you and
Yes.
you and Greg and I.
The only shame with all of that was that we needed to be whole within the four elements within ourselves, which I think that we were able to obtain in its purest form at moments, but we're not able to sustain on a constant basis.
Yeah.
So by bringing us together externally also.
Zena LeVay, we have decided it is finally time to contact you. Just the way that we were presenting things, it's like we've been watching her all along. Now it's finally time. It's great.
Yes.
But now this is getting more and more. Now what happens then is that,
well, most people are waiting to be found and told. So
Indeed,
I still
indeed.
do not have a problem with that.
now J&L Surf product, there it is, Newport Beach, that's what that was happening. So at a certain point then, I left, and then Greg came out to you at Newport Beach,
Yes.
and then that led into the World Realities era. I was off the stage, resolving a lot of personal issues,
Right.
in and out of basic training, getting into quantum physics and such, and
Which is funny because that was the same time I was getting into quantum physics. So
indeed, well, it has a lot of parallel. Again, even though we've been separated at various points, we've always been working in parallel lines.
yes,
You and I.
absolutely.
Going
And
way
usually-
back to the...
and at the times that you were doing it on a more physical plane, I was following up on what I used to more of a spiritual or the cosmic plane, as we refer to it amongst ourselves.
Right.
But the personal growth and introspection was usually being parallel and being actualized on opposite levels at the same time. Whenever you were being physical, I was being cosmic. Whenever you being cosmic, I was being physical.
Indeed. And it's the interesting ballet that finally intersected, I think, in San Diego in '93. Now, a lot of these... Now, just the World Realities thing, okay? I'll cut to the... You're going to love this. Right? These are some charts and stuff you guys were doing at the time. A lot of Greg's playing with pencils. But in here... Where is it? Extended Overview, World Realities Incorporated. And here, there it is.
Yes, the business card.
Mike Silva, President, World Realities. So, now... With that page opened and that wonderful business card that you guys came up with, just give me a little bit of a background on your attitude going in and how the whole World Realities thing was formulated. Because that really was it was actually, I would say that the period in early '91 when you and I were at Jimmy's and J&L Surf,
Right.
we were thinking about this whole idea of trying to influence the collective consciousness through the players, the celebrity players, etc. And then, when I left the scene, it became much more the business approach. So you and I had kind of laid the theoretical foundation.
This is an actualization of your and I's conversations of the cosmic. What we had decided was there were the four entities. We're going on that mainly, and that through the four, more than anything else, is when we had come up with, it was the combination of the four that would make the whole.
Right.
And the whole could then be considered the fifth.
Right.
And the one and only thing that is looked at as an individual in the eyes of the law and society is a corporation.
Right. We have articles of corporation here somewhere too.
That's how the whole World Realities things came to being. While there's some names on that list,
Yeah.
that I have a lot of love for.
Yes, this is,
things.
and so here we see. Let's just focus on these names for a second. You, Warren Graves, just now the magical appearance of Warren on the scene.
Yes.
You had met him while at KFC in Newport Beach.
Yes.
And the magical moment when we showed him the document. We showed him the plates, because you and he had a connection.
Yes.
He said, hey, come over to KFC, you got to meet this guy Steve. And nothing was the same after that. No. That magical day is eternally enshrined in the halls of the cosmic...
the state seal of the state of California.
There it is.
The great seal of the state of California.
Eureka. There's the signatures. Okay? So you and Warren and Greg obviously were, maybe probably just you and Warren, Greg coming in to bring in the flavor of the old cosmic and the chart perspectives. But so what, Warren and you really, I guess, with my departure, just said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Let's make it happen, and you made it happen.
Yes.
And you got the place in Irvine, etc.
This is how it came to be, in my recollection, which don't hold me to. But the overall view is, we're still on the friend concept. And it's still my personal beliefs that it does take the four of us, and the four of us being Steve, myself, Greg, and Warren.
Right. And even though I was absent, still you were moving along. Because I was moving along private, and I would later re-enter.
Doesn't matter.
Right.
Once you're married, in my opinion.
So you and Warren essentially, and then
and the understanding of what you had left me with until we were able to get together and then procreate it further,
right?
Rebirth it or birth it originally again, however you'd like to look at it. A corporation would be the only thing that would be considered an individual, and we were trying to manifest the actualization of God here and now. Was what we were originally trying to do.
Yes.
More than anything else, and the best way to do that would be to detail an arrangement that could be looked at as an individual, hence the corporation.
Right.
So we set up World Realities because that would be looked at as an individual, and it was to be termed an umbrella company.
Right.
Because most of the players in the chart were of the entertainment field, it was imperative to be able to have businesses that on a faith, family, entertainment, and business level, not in the proper order.
Here we see it what you're talking about, these umbrella corporation, Dreamer Entertainment's one, World Realizing, Planet Locals, Aware, Shadow Secure, I love that title, World Realities, Logos, Effect, etc. So these are, what you're saying there is that World Realities would have many different things that it's wrangling and puppeteering in a way to create a greater effect.
Right. It would have 7 different branches.
Right.
And each one of those branches would be a representation of the color scheme and what it was involved in a business form.
Chart in action.
So
using the force, and when that force analogy is so key now when we look at it, because the force, you can look at it having the 7 different frequencies like electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
The force from the dark all the way up to the light being the force itself in the pure sense, and the colors expressing it. So over that whole year then, there was a lot of, like these charts here, like my battery's going to go dead in about 10 minutes, so we're obviously going to segue.
To cut to the chase, once World Realities became actualized, the next thing to do was we believed that we had the chart in its proper order.
Which was the first 28 box chart.
Yes.
This is actually, let's see the date on that. Let's see if I can get it. The date is 10/9 of 91. So October of 91, essentially.
So the importance of this was that if we believed that the systematic workings of the flow of the energy within the chart was to be correct, that we could take any problem that was facing the world at the time and come up with a solution for it.
Yes.
And with that, we started off with the alphabet A. It just so happened that AIDS was just coming into its popularity at the time.
Yes.
And one of the leading figures in entertainment or sports, Magic Johnson, had gone public with having HIV. So hence, we started our attack plan on coming up with a treatment and or solution for AIDS based on what we knew about the chart and its workings.
And then we saw the magical force effect of you just happened to meet a guy who had a controversial cure. You happened to meet the limo driver connection with Magic Johnson in the back seat.
I happened to be able to prove it out with another member of the 7 at the time who was going to school in California that just happened to have a medical library and was able to substantiate the findings of the radical treatment that this gentleman was promoting through accepted research that was done in the 50s, a byproduct research. The actual thing they were trying to do, the Coke bottle in vitro system, had nothing to do with the actual treatment, but the gas used in the testing of the in vitro system was the same gas that was being promoted by him, and the results were exactly the same. Right.
So we saw then that you magically conjured up this guy who even may or may not have existed prior to your conjuring. I don't know.
I heard him on the radio. It's just so funny that I heard him on the radio driving back to one of the more controversial pieces in the puzzle, my brother James at the time, who would be the very last person to buy into any of this, but because he was an integral player, being that we had stayed with him, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
It would only serve a purpose that I was returning to his humble estate at the wee hours of the morning from taking care of something else and hearing this gentleman on the radio, only to call the next day back to New York to find him getting a hold of his wife calling him out in California, him calling us in Irvine on his way to San Diego from Los Angeles, coming to see us getting a flat tire, so we had to drive him to San Diego.
Right.
Then me becoming the cameraman at the television station that he was taping his little special at because the cameraman didn't show up.
So the circumstances and chance, it's never chance.
Right.
But that would be seen as just friend responding or whoever
But
helping you along.
Of how you would put it in today, where giving yourself up to how may I serve you instead of how may you serve me. So all of these factors came into play by being willing to put in the effort to be able to make it happen.
Right, and you see here a lot of your chart work at the time. This is something that Greg and Warren were working. It's actually Warren's handwriting here.
Yes, I said that's not mine.
Right, a lot of these charts were various interpretations of configurations, exploring the energy spectrum essentially.
Yes.
Which was the whole theory behind having 7 people.
So this is in the time where we decided upon verbal acid, where we could communicate the chart through language, and the key was to...
Some Mike Silva scribblings. The key was...
the key itself was to, and what I fully promote now and have lived my life since, is you need to find out how other people understand.
Right.
And if you would actually like to have somebody hear your point, it's not you making a clearly defined argument to them to understand. It's figuring out how they learn or how they understand and communicating to them in a way that they understand, so that they will get your point.
Right.
And that's what this whole chart became for me, was a language.
That's what it is, absolutely.
And more than Tangwar, it became more and more of anything to me as a way to be able to communicate with any individual, and within the shortest amount of time possible, get a clear, concise expression of what needed to be said to them in a way that they would understand it.
So whatever their content is, you put it into the chart, the language takes over and translates it somehow, and you being the master of the language, all of us collectively.
Well, my biggest thing was, it never became a process of like using the chart as a computer where you put information out and get a solution back. It was making your makeup consistent with the chart for who you were in the chart, so that you unconsciously
are in the flow,
are already in the flow, and able to immediately adapt to the circumstances, or both physically and mentally, not just linguistically.
That's
so
key.
that's the whole point for me, was that I'm never in a situation where I am the most uncomfortable, because I would either not be speaking if I didn't know what I was talking about, or not be in action if I didn't know what I was doing, because I immediately, innately am one with the chart, and it gives me the ability to become an observer when I need to learn, and become an active participant when I have the ability and the equality of those that I'm interacting with.
Indeed.
But it also has the restraints. That's when the boxes come into play, to when you are superior to those that are around you, to make sure that you pan to the least common denominator, as I used to call it. In other words, you never come off as adrift or superior or arrogant or conceited, because you immediately shrink your innate ability to expand exponentially to that which, so no one is ever uncomfortable in your presence. And that's what it's all about. It's about making everybody feel like they are just as equal as anybody else, and then being able to elevate everybody to the highest level acceptable for that particular environment.
Indeed. And so then that's a pretty good summary of the whole, let's say, effect that we were trying to achieve collectively.
Right, collectively. And that's what proved the chart out, was that I, at least in my ability for who I was and my understanding of myself, was always able to apply my understanding, whether it was the correct or not. For me, it had to be correct, because no one else can tell me who I am and how I am.
Right.
So, but in and of that, I would always prove Steve's understanding and conveyance of this information to be true.
Yes.
Because I am living testament to the truth of it, because I have applied it since I was 16 years old, even before I knew Steve and knew of it. So it was not an adaptation of me to it. It was an understanding of, this is a flow that helps explain me and who I am, and makes me notice that I do not need I've never been a proponent of mini-me's. I'm never looking for other people who are like me because I don't need any other me's. I'm looking for other people who are representations of other parts of this.
Right.
Because together we exponentially expedite things.
Yes. So now then, just all right. At this point, like they're closing in soon here, but we're definitely going to get together Sunday. We're making that happen.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll continue with the chronology from that point. But just briefly now. Just a comment on the plate phenomenon. You guys had made the new set of plates in Irvine.
Yes.
And what just generally, we got like 5 minutes.
Okay. In general, and this is where I step out more than anything, and Warren could probably fill you. Warren and Greg were the artists
Right.
in your absence more than anything else.
Right.
So they were trying to physically manifest containment units, for lack of a better word, for each one of these representations, because not only were they people in the mundane world, but they were also energy sources.
Right, here's
in
a
the
flow chart with different correlations, etc., meanings, cosmic figures, archetypal figures, etc.
And they were wanting to have the ability to channel energy and maintain it in its natural form from the cosmic or fourth dimension, and have not just a pictograph to help explain it, but to be actually to have a assemblage of a puzzle, so to speak, that once assembled could be used to traverse dimensionally.
And so the plates in this version of the chart on a content basis are almost like an x-axis, and then the force phenomenon with you actively, the 7 of you, the business, was another axis.
Yes.
And they'd be interpenetrating in a way, referring back and forth to each other. So this is like a cosmic source material, DNA, versus the transcribing in actuality on a mundane level that the business was doing.
I believe that would be a good way to explain it. Also, it could be maybe the proper assemblage and capturing of energy with this would lead to a doorway or a directional communication with the other side, for lack of better terminology. Whereas I was a firm believer that we could take steps, physical steps, to progress us to those places. I didn't want to have anybody have to believe
I hate that word.
I wanted people to be able to see its actualization in physical reality.
Show me, don't tell me, right?
But see, that's where you and I offset each other greatly, because I could handle the physical manifestations of people's wariness, whereas you could satisfy their spiritual
cosmic need, etc.
And assemblages like this are absolutely necessary, because there are those people that are spiritual and want to have some sort of contact or visualization of that which cannot be explained.
Right. It can only be, and the thing is, it can never be explained in a way, because stuff like this, it's designed to create triggers in your perception mechanism, which would be equal to the explanation.
Yes.
So this is like the classic Mike Silva line to me is always, whatever your content is, Steve, I'm just throwing it back at you with the chart structure, consistency in the chart structure, right? And so the ability to, in the same way that your role in Nuahj was to come in from a sidereal plane, and to deal with whatever forces that were bouncing away from us that we couldn't control. Actually, this is a great segue. Just a few minutes here.
Sure.
The gunslinger. When you were drawn, you had to enter the stage, cosmically speaking. The gunslinger role for you. Why was that your adaptation in your mask? Let's say.
Because I am a firm believer in truth of the situation, not in good or evil or right or wrong. And to sum it up, the encapsulation of it would be, because I have a Catholic background, is if Jesus Christ did something stupid in front of me, I'd slap him in the face just like I would anybody else. And the problem for the situation is, if I am called in to two sides of something, I do not care about what is right or what is wrong. I only care about the truth of the matter. And if the truth is not accepted, then I will just destroy both sides, so there is no longer any matter. Right.
And the Roland figure was a model for you. Ironically, you have been reading the Gunslinger books during the build-up to Nuahj.
Yes.
And the Gunslinger books were released almost on cue at times, like Wizard and Glass, I'm not Wizard and Glass, but Wastelands was big during the Irvine period.
Yes.
And the whole idea of riddling the mono, coming up with the cosmic riddle. And really, with the Roland issue, we'll get on our next session with the whole BA of the A-Team model. But Roland, essentially, the pure cosmic form, where you had a mythological image that applied to your function in terms of the greater cosmic.
Well, mainly for my own self-satisfaction more than to have a mirror image of what was going on. But from the Roland character, which was most enjoyable to me, is it wasn't about the thought process. Not that you didn't have the ability to think for yourself or anything, but once given a mission and the parameters of the mission, it is not for anything but to accomplish the mission. And that does not mean not to have moralistic issues weigh upon you or anything. Is that I firmly believe that the players in whatever particular game, for lack of better terminology, if you know the rules, those are the rules. And if things are going to be restructured, then everybody has the right to agree or disagree upon continuing on the play of the game.
Right.
But I refuse to function. That's why I will never come up with the solution of what we're looking for or the end result that we're trying to achieve, just the way to obtain it or forcing the issue of making it happen.
So you think that's an issue of effectiveness for you? You can't be concerned with defining the goal only in getting us to it. What do we need to do on the way? What are our mission requirements?
Only as a group assemblage. For my own personal self, I am in total control of my own actions and all of that. But if I'm going to go that route, then I will disappear forever and never be involved with anybody else, because if I'm coming up with my own end results, then why the fuck do I need anybody else?
Right.
More than anything else. And I refuse to, if I'm going to handle my role effectively, I am what has been termed for myself the left-hand man. Because a right-hand man is always looking to eventually take over the spot of the head guy.
That's
He's
nice.
The yes
Left-hand man. That's
the
nice.
left. I have no interest other than the interest. I am the representation of the leadership when the leadership is not present to be itself. And that's all it is for me. That I must buy into the dream or the goal or the vision that has been set forth for that particular scenario. Otherwise I should not be a part of it. And what has to happen to achieve that, I cannot worry about the consequences or even the gains or benefits. It's not my concern. If I sign up for that particular endeavor, then it is my job to, and within the parameters, if everyone's got to be able to come along, well, it better be stated up front. Otherwise, if I lose some people on the way, oh well.
And so now, the Roland figure, just briefly, it's probably going to start flashing to Rhode Island in a second, but Roland in relation to President of World Realities, what's the duality there, if any?
The duality there mainly would be, as president, I don't necessarily, it is my first man, last man concept, where Roland probably should have passed away a long time ago by way of all the other gunslingers, but happened to be the last man standing still. But he was also the lead man in trying to fix what was happening.
Point man, in a sense,
in a sense.
Right.
So as the president of World Realities and his congruation, the actual board of directors would be the solution people.
Right.
And the president is just at the helm of making sure that their aims and goals, the company itself stays in the direction of those aims.
Interesting. It's like the president as the executive branch. The president doesn't come up with the laws or make the judgments. He is just the captain of the ship as it's moving.
And he's also the person. It's also the blame factor where the buck stops here.
Right. That's good. That's good.
So more than anything else, the other people assemblage who have the real control and power are untouchable.
Right.
And that is my role. For those people that have been appointed in the powers of positions of power, authority, and responsibility, become untouchable. I am their safety blanket.
Right.
That nothing can. You have to come through me to get to them.
Right. All right. Last comment then for this session. Got a sentence. One last sentence on all that you just said. Anything?
The only fate is what we create.
Nice.